Students for Free Thought at Ohio State University. It's been involved with the Secular Student Alliance. And all of this after coming from a evangelical Christian background. So Don's got some perspective, and he's here today to talk to you about getting your group politically active.
Hello, good morning. Afternoon? Yes, it is afternoon. Okay. So, yeah, going to talk about getting your group politically active. And these are a couple of pictures which there's a tension about these pictures because they display a certain form of activism. And I'm kind of going to downplay the form of activism that these pictures represent, which is protesting and picketing. But I'm not going to denigrate them per se, just downplay them relative to another idea. These are great things to do, especially as beginning activists. It's one of the things I think that everyone who gets into political activism, has a bug for it, thinks of first. You know, you've got some passionate issue that drives you to want to make some kind of statement or change, and so you think, make signs, stand in front of a building, march around, chant slogans, whatever. And that's grand, that's good, that's a beginning step. I think though as student leaders, you know, you're already pretty politically active in a sense by being active in the free thought community. So I wanted to take it from that basic level to, I guess maybe a bit more of an advanced kind of political activism theory. So political activism, just to clarify, Greta Christina yesterday had made a very interesting point that coming out is one of the strongest political acts a person can make. I agree with that at a certain level, but at another level, in terms of political activism, coming out is a preliminary step. It's actually what has to be done before you can really get started with the real meat and potatoes of trying to affect change. If you're not out, of course you can't really do anything. So it is extremely important, and I definitely recommend promoting that as an act of political conscience, as well as individual, you know, just trying to be honest with yourself and the people around you. I like about the definition of activism here, the bold word. Okay, so political, yes, changing the structure, activities, affairs of government, politics of the state. And activism, the doctrine or practice of vigorous action or involvement as a means of achieving political or other goals, sometimes by demonstrations, protests, etc. And again, that gets to the sort of baby political activism that is most common and most generally well regarded. But I wanted to talk about, and I'll get to something that I think of more as grown-up political activism. So there are basically 4 levels at which you can target political activism. Local, which can be anything, you know, even your neighborhood. Honestly, there are neighborhood issues that go on, especially like Matt. You know, you live in New York City, and neighborhood activism there is the equivalent of state activism in Rhode Island. Your campus, there are very often major secularist issues at play on college campuses, and I think unfortunately a lot of times those pass the free thought groups on these campuses by. We just don't know that they're happening sometimes. So being aware that your school's policies may advance or retard the interests of the secular community can be an important, just, you know, level of awareness. Your city, county, region, and this is all still focusing locally at the sub-state level, you know, within your city, city council, sometimes like Liz and I, and some of you I'm sure live in capital cities, and so the city can kind of overlap with the state at certain junctures, but even at the base level of your town hall, your city commissions on whatever issues, there can be issues raised that you might want to try to make some difference in. Regionally, you know, some sections of states, I grew up in Virginia, and it's kind of 2 states. So there are going to be different issues for Northern Virginia than for Southern Virginia. Northern Virginia being DC and much more politically and in all ways developed and aware. And in the South, you know, you might just want to be like, hey, quit trying to own people. So, yeah, we just got over that in Denver. All right. The federal level, pretty obvious. There was the Godless Americans March on Washington in '02. I'm hopeful to see more symbolic. I think of the Godless March on Washington as a symbolic gesture, and I think it's an important one. I'll sort of be able to explain some of the background for the distinction between symbolic and more non-gesture type activism that's really product-oriented or conclusion-oriented. And worldwide activism, I think, for me, I had to add this into the slide after Austin's talk last night because honestly, it hadn't occurred to me to think of global activism as much of an option. I still can't really think of many mechanisms for doing it, but you can, I was talking to Austin last night and he had mentioned, I don't even know if it was during his speech or after, that one way you can try to impact global politics is by changing your federal politics. Trying to deal with issues like the family that I'll talk about shortly, issues like unfair foreign policies of various stripes that maybe respect certain religious communities over other religious communities and create a tension there that is unnecessary and unhelpful. And you can do actions at the federal level, the level of Congress, the executive branch, which can have an effect on the worldwide stage. In general, regarding what is a justifiable thing to oppose politically actively as secularists, the Lemon Test is kind of the watershed hallmark. Supreme Court came out with the Lemon Test in '71, and it basically says, and try to let this sink in, try to be aware of the spirit of this test. It's basically law, it's case law. All actions by the governments of the federal United States and state and local governments to avoid entanglement, separation of church and state issues have to meet these three criteria. They have to have a secular purpose, which is obvious on the surface of the issue. They have to have a principle of primary effect that neither advances nor inhibits religion, and they must not foster excessive entanglement between government and religion. If you want, at the end, we can go back and talk about how, it's pretty vaguely worded, and if you want to get into questions of specifics on that, we can do that at the end. With that in mind, there are clear issues that we can and I believe should be trying to change politically. And as individuals, yes, great, go, good. As student leaders, we can enlist our groups to facilitate, and you're one person. If you try to make a political stand on something, that's one person. If you've got 15 people at your meetings, you can multiply by 15 your level of political effectiveness. Some of the issues that we can approach dealing with, the family, raise your hand if you don't know what the family means. You do all know what the family means, good. They host the congressional prayer breakfast that just happened that Obama attended, unfortunately. They have been linked to the recent spate of Ugandan laws attempting to make homosexuality a capital offense. And they're basically major jerks, and we want to stop them from getting what they want. And this can be done, I'll get into methods shortly. The National Day of Prayer is, I think, one of the grossest entanglements between the federal government and religion. A federally sponsored day of prayer, which ostensibly is a non-sectarian event. However, I have yet to see any other than Christian events for the Day of Prayer. Maybe there are one or two Muslim communities or Jewish communities or whatnot, but it is vastly predominantly Christian, of course, as our population is. Prayer breakfasts happen not only at the federal level, but even at the local, state level, and those are things which, if you want to, try to make a difference in the political culture, they are, I think, worth talking about and worth trying to if not inform your representatives that you oppose these things, actually going ahead and trying to have them abolished. It can be done. Religious monument installations on government property, I mean, there are two kinds of religious installations on government property, temporary and permanent. Temporary religious things are relatively fine. They aren't what's considered excessive entanglement between government and religion, and so Christmas displays, so long as they aren't sectarian, so long as humanists, freethinkers are allowed to put up whatever form of holiday celebrating monuments that they want, that's fair and equal access, and that's cool. But there was recently, I forget his name and even his state, I believe he was an Alabama Supreme Court Justice. Ray Moore, is that it? Roy Moore, or something like that, yes. He was actually removed from the state Supreme Court because he refused to take away a 6 bajillion ton giant stone sculpture of the Ten Commandments from the front of the Supreme Court of the state. And, that was an effective act. I'm not sure if it was the ACLU or what organizations really made hay about that and got it to the point where he was removed from the court. But, it was a great victory, I believe, for the secularist movement. Explicitly sectarian prayers at the openings of meetings of government bodies, and formal proclamations exhorting citizens to pray. Basically, I think, I just wanted to remind people to keep your antennae out there and sensitive for things even at that level. If in your local community, the town hall or city hall opens its regular meetings with a prayer, look into that. See if that's something that incites you or your group members to want to make some change, to make some stand about it. Some other political issues for secularists at federal level, proselytization in the military. There have been a number of attempts to stop things. I'm familiar specifically with the Air Force Academy, Colorado Springs, having a great deal of Christian religious material available in various places, just basically really promoting Christian doctrines and chick tracts type stuff all over the place. Not so good. As Sean mentioned yesterday, is Sean gone? Sean, love him. Exemptions from child safety laws for religious child care providers. That's just madness. I'm not sure whether this happens more at the state and local level or at the federal level. I'm guessing the state and local level, so this is something that you'd want to check into in your state. But it's definitely something that things should be done about. That's just unconscionable that those exemptions exist. Austin was talking about blasphemy laws, and a lot of people in this room probably do know, the majority of people outside of this room probably do not know that anti-blasphemy type laws have been proposed even in the United States. The academic freedom laws proposed in Florida and in other states would censure professors at the whim of their students from not necessarily it's sort of the opposite, the flip side of the coin of laws that Matt responded to where his teacher was promoting religion. So these academic freedom laws would censure professors for promoting evolution or any form of what is by a student considered offensive anti-religious or non-religious talk. The way these laws as proposed, and I don't know that any have passed. I don't know of any specific instances of these laws actually making it, but they're in the ether out there trying to work their way in. But yeah. I hate letting thoughts go, but I'll have to let that one go. All right. Another issue you might want to look into, type of issue, the government funding of religious hospitals that refuse to provide certain kinds of reproductive health care services for religious reasons, denial of birth control, morning after pill. specifically. And these hospitals are given your money with which to say, no, you may not have birth control or morning after pill. And that's just uncool. Exemptions that allow religious organizations to discriminate in employment based on criteria other than religion. It is generally regarded that a private institution like a religious institution is legally permitted to refuse to hire people based on the religious identification. I don't think we should, as a personal sense of fairness, I don't think we should expect a religious school to be forced legally to hire an atheist. However, when they use non-religious criteria, such as sexual orientation, sometimes perhaps even gender or race, those are, I think, distinct violations of civil rights. Tax law, also another place that gets really hairy and things can be worthy of making some hay about. I'm sure you probably all know that churches don't pay state, federal, sales tax, income tax, preachers. They're just basically untaxed. And I don't like that personally. I'm sure probably many of you agree, and the members of the groups would agree, so that could be an area where you could make some kind of a political action. Okay, so about the general two modes, like baby activism and grown-up activism, there's a strategic level of concern. So some people think that activism consists only of picketing, protesting, and writing letters. Again, I don't mean to denigrate those things, but I do want to raise another kind of activism above it. They're helpful. Those things are very helpful. They're done to demonstrate public opinion on the side of your issue. And they do put public pressure. They can be used to shame, and sometimes that can actually be effective. However, if that's all you're doing, it's probably better for you to consider adding some things to it, because it's kind of a flash in the pan sort of thing. You can't expect picketing to change very much at all. You don't want to just pat yourself on the back. You want to actually accomplish some political change. So, while I do love picketing, protesting, and letter writing, we have to be careful to avoid doing the obvious things that don't accomplish what we really want, which is changing the nature and policies of government. Those things aren't always ineffective, but they do have limited political value. And I want to stress that they are like a gateway political activity. They'll get you in, and then you can start to do other things. Another great thing about specifically letter writing is that, and I really want to stress this, you can do this during your meetings, after your meetings. It's just such a low cost of entry activity that I highly recommend doing it to inspire and just encourage people to even think about political activism. And they can make a bit of a difference. So how do we actually go about doing the grown-up political activism that I'm talking about? First, you have to make sure you're dealing with a real problem. Check the Lemon Law, kind of the spirit of that. And so then you want to actually figure out who's in charge of the issue that you're against or that you want to promote. You want to get to the decision maker. You want to contact them directly. Writing a letter is one thing. Showing up at their office is a million times better. And I wanted to mention the Capitol Hill Scholars Program that the SCA is doing. It's a really good program to get internships for students in DC, visiting Congress, and talking about our issues. You want to explain to the decision maker what the problem is in their office, ideally on the phone, second, or by letter as a third option. You want to make sure you've stated your position and your proposal clearly, and not just said, hey, we don't like X. You want to say, we don't like X and we propose Y. You want to negotiate a solution that's acceptable to both parties. Be diplomatic, be willing to compromise. You can't expect your having gone to all the trouble to show up at a local or federal official's office to be the deal maker. You've got to know where their interests lie and try to work with that. You want to obtain a timetable. You don't want simply to say, hey, please, this thing, bad, this other thing, good. You want to say, all right, what can we accomplish about this issue that really applies to my constituency, the people like timetable makes other options available. At that point, you can say, hey, we agreed that by this time, X would be done. It hasn't, and now you can do some of the more consciousness raising, picketing, protesting. That's where that really becomes effective. That's shame strategy. You want to thank them for agreeing to make the compromise with you. You want to be really cordial so that your shaming strategy, if you need to get to that, is more effective. You want to follow up, make sure everything is clearly understood, that people aren't out of office now, and that things don't slip through the cracks, as can happen. And your last, I think, step is to sue. If government officials insist on denying civil rights to secularists or promoting religion in opposition to the spirit of the Constitution, you can sue them. You can definitely take them to court and sue them to make them do what they ought to do. They can be forced by the court. So 5 easy things you can do and should do as soon as possible. Sign up for the SCA Action Alerts. Talk about it to your friends, your group members. Get them to sign up for it. Make sure everyone you possibly can influence is getting emails about federal especially, but also state and local issues for secularism. There are some websites I recommend. The SCA's website is awesome. American Atheists does a lot of legal work. FFRF, Freedom from Religion Foundation, they do a lot of legal work. You can check their website and find out things that you might not know about. Americans United for Separation of Church and State, really great. And that's just for general information. You can talk to your group members about what their interest level and their interest type is. If your group really happens to all want to do federal level kinds of activism, great, organize in that direction. If they all want to do more local stuff, great, organize in that direction. You want to consider having an officer in your group who deals exclusively or specifically with political issues and keeps the discussion alive. As a group leader, your plate is so full, it'd probably be good to have someone who's just exclusively focusing on trying to keep your group politically active, because it can fade away easily due to day-to-day concerns. And Capitol Hill Scholars is kind of the premier level, I would think, of student secular activism. Going to Washington and becoming an intern with the SCA, visiting Capitol Hill multiple times on multiple issues, it's actually the getting of the work done. So I'm done. I'm way over my time. Does anyone have any questions or comments?